Death Valley National Park, National Parks of the United States podcast. To understand Death Valley National Park is to understand the absolute limits of the North American landscape. It is a place defined by extremes, a geography of superlatives, where the lowest point on the continent sits in the shadow of snow-capped peaks, and where the hottest air temperatures ever recorded on Earth have been verified. It is not merely a desert, but a geological amphitheater where the forces of the planet are laid bare, stripped of vegetation and soil, revealing the skeletal structure of the Earth itself. Located primarily in the southeastern corner of California, with a small sliver extending into Nevada, this park encompasses over 3.4 million acres, making it the largest national park in the contiguous United States. It sits within the Great Basin Desert and the northern reaches of the Mojave Desert, acting as a transitional zone that preserves a vast, untamed wilderness of salt-crusted basins, sand dunes, badlands, canyons, and mountains. The identity of Death Valley is often misunderstood as simply a barren wasteland, a void to be avoided. However, scientifically and ecologically, it is a vibrant, complex system teeming with life that has adapted to conditions that would kill a human without protection in a matter of hours. The park was established as a national monument in 1933 by President Herbert Hoover and later designated a national park in 1994 through the California Desert Protection Act. It is the ancestral homeland of the Timbisha Shoshone people, who have lived within this valley for over a millennium, adapting their culture to the seasonal rhythms of the land long before European prospectors arrived, seeking gold, silver, and borax. The geographic setting of Death Valley is the result of immense tectonic violence. The park lies within the Basin and Range Province, a vast region of the western United States where the Earth's crust has been stretching and thinning for millions of years. As the crust pulls apart, large blocks of land drop down along fault lines to create basins, while adjacent blocks tilt upward to form mountain ranges. Death Valley is a supreme example of a graben, a depressed block of the Earth's crust bordered by parallel faults. To the west rises the Panamint Range, crowned by Telescope Peak at 11,049 feet. To the east lies the Amargosa Range. Between them sits the valley floor, which plunges to dramatic depths. This vertical relief is staggering. The drop from the summit of Telescope Peak to the bottom of the valley is twice the depth of the Grand Canyon. The most iconic landmark of this vertical dynamism is Badwater Basin. At 282 feet below sea level, it is the lowest point in North America. Standing on the boardwalk at Badwater, one looks out over a vast, polygonal landscape of salt crusts. This is not sand, but a layer of sodium chloride, calcite, gypsum, and borax compounds. These salts are the chemical ghosts of ancient lakes. During the Pleistocene epoch, a wetter climate sustained a massive body of water known as Lake Manly, which stretched nearly 100 miles long and was 600 feet deep. As the climate warmed and dried, the water evaporated, leaving behind concentrated minerals. Today, new salt crystals continue to form through a cycle of occasional flooding and rapid evaporation, creating a jagged, shifting floor that expands and contracts with thermal changes. The climate that drives these processes is fierce. Death Valley is the hottest place on Earth and the driest place in North America. On July 10, 1913, the Furnace Creek Weather Station recorded an air temperature of 134 degrees Fahrenheit, a world record that stands to this day. The mechanism behind this heat is a function of topography. The valley is long, narrow, and walled by high mountains. Solar radiation heats the desert surface, which in turn warms the air. As the heated air rises, it cools slightly, but the high walls of the valley trap it. The air is then compressed and pushed back down to the valley floor, heating up even more in a process called adiabatic heating. This creates a feedback loop, a convection oven effect that sustains lethal temperatures throughout the summer. The extreme aridity is caused by the rain shadow effect. Moisture-laden air masses moving from the Pacific Ocean are forced upward by mountain ranges to the west, primarily the Sierra Nevada, but also the Panamint, Argus, and Inyo ranges. As the air rises, it cools and condenses, dropping its moisture as rain or snow on the windward slopes. By the time the air descends into Death Valley, it is bone dry. The average annual rainfall is less than 2 inches, and some years see no rain at all. Yet water is the primary architect of the landscape. When rain does fall, it often comes in torrential convective storms. Because the desert soil is hard-packed and lacks vegetation to absorb the flow, the water rushes down the steep canyons in flash floods. These floods carry immense loads of rock and gravel, depositing them at the mouths of canyons to form alluvial fans. Death Valley is world-renowned for these fans, particularly the coalescence of multiple fans into a bajada, a continuous apron of sediment that lines the foot of the mountains. One of the most visually arresting features formed by these geological and hydrological forces is Zabriskie Point. Here, visitors look out over a maze of golden, highly eroded badlands. These are composed of sediments from the Furnace Creek Formation, deposited in an ancient lake that existed roughly 5 million years ago. The vibrant colors, yellows, oranges, and chocolate browns, come from oxidized minerals and volcanic ashfall. The lack of vegetation allows erosion to carve intricate rills and gullies, creating a landscape that looks like the skin of a wrinkled planet. Nearby, the Artist's Drive Formation showcases the region's volcanic history. The Artist's Palette is a hillside splashed with oxidation colors, red and pink from iron, green from mica degradation, and purple from manganese. It serves as a reminder that this quiet valley was once a chaotic scene of explosive volcanism. Further north lies Ubahibe Crater, a stark testament to the violent interaction between magma and water. Ubahibe is a Mar volcano, created not by a lava flow, but by a massive steam explosion. Within the last few thousand years, a blink of an eye in geologic time, rising magma encountered groundwater. The water flashed to steam, expanding instantly and blasting a hole 600 feet deep and half a mile wide. The surrounding landscape is blanketed in dark cinders, and the crater rim offers a view into the anatomy of a hydromagmatic eruption. Perhaps the most mysterious phenomenon in the park occurs at the racetrack playa. This dry lake bed, nestled in a remote valley between the Cottonwood and Last Chance ranges, is famous for its sailing stones. Large dolomite boulders, some weighing several hundred pounds, sit at the end of long tracks etched into the dry mud, suggesting they have moved across the flat surface. For decades, the mechanism was unknown, fueling speculation about magnetism or high winds. In 2014, scientists finally observed the process. It requires a perfect storm of conditions, a rare rainfall that creates a shallow layer of water, followed by a freezing night that forms thin windowpane ice. As the sun rises and the ice breaks into floating panels, light winds drive the ice sheets against the rocks, pushing them slowly across the slick mud. It is a subtle, delicate mechanism that moves heavy stones, illustrating the surprising power of minor forces acting in unison. Despite the harshness of the physical environment, Death Valley supports a surprising diversity of plant life. The park is home to over 1,000 species of plants, dozens of which are endemic, meaning they are found nowhere else on Earth. The vegetation is stratified by elevation. On the salt pan, conditions are too toxic for almost anything to grow. Just above the salt line, exploring the concept of halophytes or salt-tolerant plants, we find the pickleweed. This plant manages the high saline content of the soil by isolating salt in the vacuoles of its cells, eventually shedding the salty tips of its stems. Moving up the alluvial fans into the creosote bush scrub community, we encounter the dominant plant of the Mojave, the creosote bush. This shrub is a master of survival. Its small waxy leaves reduce water loss, and its roots secrete chemicals that inhibit the growth of competing plants nearby, resulting in the evenly spaced distribution characteristic of desert flats. Some creosote rings in the desert, known as clone colonies, are estimated to be thousands of years old, making them some of the oldest living organisms on the planet. In the mid-elevations, the vegetation shifts to Joshua trees, blackbrush, and pinyon juniper woodlands. The Joshua tree, actually a species of yucca, is an indicator species of the Mojave Desert. Its spiky leaves funnel rare moisture down to its roots, and its relationship with the yucca moth is a classic example of coevolution. The moth is the sole pollinator of the tree, and the tree provides the only food source for the moth's larvae. At the highest elevations on the slopes of Telescope Peak, subalpine forests of limber pine and Great Basin bristlecone pine exist. These trees are adapted to cold, wind, and rocky soil. The presence of bristlecone pines here connects the park to the ancient dendrochronology of the Great Basin, as these trees can live for several millennia. One of the most spectacular biological events in the park is the superbloom. This is not an annual occurrence, but a rare alignment of meteorological factors. For a superbloom to occur, there must be a series of well-spaced rainstorms throughout the winter and spring, sufficient warmth, and a lack of drying winds. When these conditions are met, the desert floor explodes in a carpet of desert gold, sand verbena, and gravel ghost. These ephemeral plants, or wildlowers, spend most of their existence as seeds lying dormant in the soil, sometimes for decades. They are known as drought escapers. They do not survive the drought. They avoid it entirely by completing their life cycle rapidly when water is available, flowering, setting seed, and dying back before the summer heat returns. The fauna of Death Valley is equally adapted to the rigors of the environment. Animals here face two main challenges: maintaining water balance and regulating body temperature. Behavioral adaptations are common. Most desert animals are nocturnal or crepuscular, active only during the cool of the night or at dawn and dusk. During the heat of the day, they retreat into burrows where the temperature and humidity remain relatively stable. The kangaroo rat is a physiological marvel of the desert. This small rodent can live its entire life without ever drinking freestanding water. It derives all the moisture it needs from the metabolic breakdown of the dry seeds it eats. Its kidneys are hyper-efficient, producing urine that is 5 times more concentrated than that of a human, minimizing water loss. Larger mammals like the desert bighorn sheep utilize a different strategy. They are anatomical marvels of agility, capable of navigating steep, rocky terrain to access remote springs and tanajas, which are natural rock depressions that hold rainwater. Their specialized hooves act like suction cups on the slick rock. Bighorn sheep can tolerate significant dehydration, losing up to 30% of their body weight in water, and then rehydrating rapidly when water is found. They are often seen at lower elevations in the winter and migrate to higher, cooler peaks in the summer. Predators, such as the coyote, kit fox, and bobcat, sit at the top of the food web. The kit fox, the size of a house cat, has enormous ears that serve a dual purpose. They provide excellent hearing to detect insects and rodents, and they act as radiators to dissipate body heat. The sidewinder rattlesnake, a reptile iconic to the dune fields, has developed a unique form of locomotion. By throwing loops of its body forward, it minimizes contact with the scorching sand, touching the ground with only 2 points of its body at any given time. This prevents the snake from overheating while moving across surfaces that can reach 160 degrees Fahrenheit. Among the most remarkable stories of survival in Death Valley is that of the pupfish. These small, iridescent bluefish are remnants of the Ice Age. When Lake Manly dried up 10,000 years ago, the fish were stranded in isolated springs and pools. Over millennia, they evolved into several distinct species, each adapted to its specific, tiny habitat. The most famous is the Devil's Hole pupfish. They live in a water-filled geologic cavern that is a detached unit of the park in Nevada. Their entire natural range is the surface area of a small swimming pool. They live on a shallow rock shelf just below the water's surface, feeding on algae. This population is incredibly fragile, fluctuating between mere dozens and a few hundred individuals. They represent a powerful example of evolution in isolation, similar to the finches of the Galapagos, but occurring in the middle of a desert. The ecological zones of Death Valley are often described using the concept of life zones, a model developed by C. Hart Merriam. As one travels from the salt flats to the peaks, the climate mimics a journey from Mexico to Canada. At the bottom in the lower Sonoran zone, the heat is intense and vegetation is sparse. As elevation increases to the upper Sonoran zone, sagebrush and pinyon pines appear. Higher still, in the transition and Canadian zones, the air is cool and forests thrive. This vertical stacking of habitats allows for high biodiversity within a relatively small horizontal distance. Bird life in the park is surprisingly rich, largely because the valley acts as a migrant trap. Birds migrating along the Pacific Flyway often stop at the oases, Furnace Creek, Stovepipe Wells, and Wild Rose, to rest and refuel. The roadrunner, a member of the cuckoo family, is a permanent resident. It is a ground predator, using its speed to chase down lizards and insects. The common raven is another ubiquitous sight, highly intelligent and opportunistic, often scavenging near human encampments. The natural processes in Death Valley are dominated by erosion and deposition. Without thick vegetation to hold soil in place, the wind and water act directly on the geology. The sand dunes near Stovepipe Wells, known as the Mesquite Flat Sand Dunes, are a result of wind patterns. Sand eroded from the northern mountains is carried by the wind until it hits a barrier, usually a mountain range, causing the wind to slow down and drop its load. The dunes are constantly reshaping, yet they remain trapped in the same general location due to the conflicting wind currents. Tectonic activity is an ongoing process here. The valley floor is tilting eastward. This is evident at the Salt Pan, where the lowest point is near the eastern edge, at Badwater, rather than in the center. Fresh fault scarps, small cliffs formed by recent earthquakes, can be seen cutting across alluvial fans, indicating that the mountains are still rising and the valley is still sinking. This geological restlessness creates a landscape that is raw and unfinished. The concept of the playa is central to the park's hydrology. Playas are dry lake beds with no outlet. In most river systems, water flows to the sea. In the Great Basin, and specifically in Death Valley, water flows inward. The Amargosa River, which flows into the southern end of the valley, is a rare example of a river that runs largely underground. It surfaces only where bedrock forces it up, creating oases, before disappearing again into the sand. When it finally reaches the Badwater Basin, it dies, evaporating into the heat and adding its mineral load to the salt crust. The darkness of the night sky is another defining natural feature of the park. Death Valley is designated as a Gold-Tier International Dark Sky Park. The extreme dryness of the air, combined with the distance from major cities, results in little atmospheric distortion or light pollution. This allows for a view of the cosmos that is nearly identical to what the ancestors of the Timbisha Shoshone saw thousands of years ago. The preservation of this dark sky is considered a conservation priority, protecting the nocturnal environment for wildlife that relies on celestial cues for navigation and reproduction. Human interaction with this landscape, while not the focus of a biological survey, has left marks that illustrate the difficulty of resource extraction in such a biome. The famous 20-mule team borax wagons are a symbol of the late 19th century. Borax, a mineral used in soaps and detergents, was scraped from the valley floor. The logistics of moving this material out of the hottest place on Earth required immense endurance from both men and animals. Today, the mines are closed, but the mineralogy remains a key subject of study. The borate minerals found here are rare and provide clues about the chemical composition of the ancient lakes. The park also contains a significant paleontological record. In the copper-colored canyons, scientists have found tracks of camels, horses, and mastodons that roamed the area during the Pliocene and Pleistocene epochs. These trace fossils provide a window into a time when the region was a grassy savanna, highlighting the drastic climatic shifts that the Earth is capable of undergoing. The transition from a lush grassland to a hyper-arid salt pan is a sobering lesson in climate dynamics. Ecological balance in Death Valley is precarious. The food webs are simple compared to a rainforest, meaning that the removal of one species can have cascading effects. The introduction of invasive species, such as the burro, wild donkey, has caused significant damage. Burros trample the vegetation around springs and foul the water, outcompeting the native bighorn sheep. Management efforts have been undertaken to reduce burro populations to protect the fragile desert springs. Similarly, the invasion of non-native plants like cheatgrass poses a fire risk. The desert plants are not adapted to fire. When they burn, they often do not recover, leading to a permanent alteration of the ecosystem. The struggle for existence in Death Valley is a study in efficiency. Every organism, from the microscopic bacteria in the salt crust to the soaring golden eagle, is optimized for conservation. Plants orient their leaves to avoid the midday sun. Animals concentrate their urine. Seeds wait decades for rain. It is a biological laboratory where the variables are set to the extreme, revealing the incredible plasticity and resilience of life. The park's vastness also creates a sense of acoustic isolation. In the deep canyons and out on the salt flats, the background noise level is near zero. This silence is a rare natural resource in the modern world. It allows for the subtle sounds of the desert to be heard. The crackle of expanding salt crystals, the wind shifting the sand grains, the wing beats of a raven. This acoustic environment is part of the park's wilderness character, which is protected under federal law. 91% of the park is designated as wilderness, the highest level of conservation protection, prohibiting road building, mechanical transport, and permanent structures. One of the more peculiar geological formations is the Devil's Golf Course. This area is a vast field of jagged rock-hard salt crystals. Unlike the smooth, salted Badwater, these crystals have been eroded by wind and rain into sharp spires. The name comes from a 1934 guidebook that stated only the devil could play golf on such a surface. Listening closely at the Devil's Golf Course, one can sometimes hear metallic pings and pops as the salt crystals expand and contract with the changing temperature. In the northern part of the park, the landscape changes again at the Ubehebe craters. Here, the sedimentary layers of the valley walls are exposed, revealing stripe patterns of orange and black. These are the result of different depositional environments, stream beds, lake bottoms, and volcanic ash, stacked over millions of years, and then sliced open by the crater explosion. This area helps geologists piece together the timeline of the valley's formation, reading the rock layers like pages in a book. The interaction between the atmosphere and the lithosphere is vividly displayed in the canyon narrows. Mosaic Canyon is a prime example. The walls are composed of polished marble. This marble began as limestone, deposited in a warm, shallow sea hundreds of millions of years ago. Heat and pressure metamorphosed the limestone into marble. Over time, flash floods carrying grit and gravel have scoured the canyon walls, polishing the stone to a smooth, slick finish. This process creates natural chutes and dry falls that demonstrate the abrasive power of water in a desert environment. The concept of deep time is inescapable here. The rocks in the chaotic distinctness of the Funeral Mountains date back to the Proterozoic eon, over 1.7 billion years ago. These are some of the oldest rocks in California. They have been buried, cooked, folded, and uplifted. To walk through the canyons of Death Valley is to walk through the interior of the Earth's crust, exposed by the unrelenting pull of tectonic plates. Survival strategies of the flora extend beyond water conservation to defense. Many desert plants are heavily armored. The spines of a cactus are modified leaves. They serve two functions. They protect the succulent water-filled stem from thirsty herbivores, and they provide self-shading. The dense mesh of spines creates a microlayer of trapped air next to the plant's surface, which is slightly cooler than the ambient air temperature. This insulation is crucial for survival in the intense solar radiation. The relationship between the Timbisha-Shoshone and the mesquite tree is a significant aspect of the park's cultural ecology. The honey mesquite produces nutritious bean pods that were a staple food source for the indigenous people. The groves were carefully managed, pruned, and harvested. This anthropogenic influence helped shape the distribution of mesquite groves in the valley. Today, the Timbisha-Shoshone tribe has a recognized land base within the park, and their traditional ecological knowledge is increasingly integrated into park management strategies, particularly regarding fire management and plant harvesting. High above the valley, the Panamint City ghost town sits in a narrow canyon, a remnant of a brief, feverish silver boom. While the human history is fascinating, the natural reclamation of the site is the scientific story. Wood rots slowly in the dry air, but flash floods relentlessly undercut stone foundations. The inevitable return of the land to its natural state is accelerated by the geological instability of the canyon walls. The concept of the soil crust is vital to the desert's health. In undisturbed areas, the soil surface is often knobby and dark. This is a cryptobiotic crust, a community of cyanobacteria, lichens, and mosses that binds the soil particles together. This living crust prevents wind erosion, retains soil moisture, and fixes nitrogen from the air, making it available for plants. It is incredibly fragile. A single footstep can destroy a crust that took decades to form. Preservation of these crusts is essential for preventing dust storms and maintaining the fertility of the desert. The visual clarity of the air in Death Valley allows for the observation of atmospheric optics. The phenomenon of the inferior mirage is common on the salt flats. As the ground heats up, it warms the layer of air directly above it. Light rays coming from the sky are bent upward by this hot, less dense air, creating the illusion of water on the horizon. This is not a hallucination, but a physical refraction of light, a testament to the intense thermal gradients present in the valley. Throughout the park, the silence and the scale provoke a sense of insignificance. The geological features are massive, mountains moving, basins dropping, operating on timescales that dwarf human history. The biological features are tenacious, fighting for every drop of water and every bit of shade. It is a landscape that demands respect and preparation. The beauty of Death Valley lies not in traditional scenic lushness, but in the naked display of the fundamental forces that shape our planet. It is a place where the earth is torn open, where the sun is a physical weight, and where life, against all odds, finds a way to endure. This resilience of life in the face of geological antagonism provides the perfect segue into understanding the human history of this region. For if a biological organism requires specialized adaptations to survive here, a human culture requires an even more profound cognitive mapping of the landscape. To view Death Valley merely as a hostile wilderness is to ignore the thousands of years of successful habitation by the Timbisha Shoshone people, whose presence challenges the very name of the park. For the Timbisha, this valley was never a place of death, but a place of life, provided one knew where to look and how to listen to the land. Their continued presence serves as a living link between the ancient archaeological record and the modern management of the park, offering a perspective on the ecosystem that is grounded not just in scientific observation, but in centuries of survival and spiritual connection. The Timbisha Shoshone call the valley Tumpisa, which translates to rock paint, referring to the red ochre found in the clay-rich soils of the valley that was used for traditional face paint and medicine. This name anchors their identity to the geology itself. Unlike the boom and bust cycle of the European miners who came for gold and left when it ran out, the Timbisha developed a culture based on sustainability and cyclical movement. They practiced a form of vertical migration that mirrored the seasonal behaviors of the bighorn sheep. In the winter, when the high peaks were buried in snow and the valley floor was mild, they lived in the bottomlands near the mesquite groves. As the heat of the spring and summer began to rise, they would ascend into the Panamint Mountains, following the ripening of plants and the availability of game, eventually reaching the pinyon juniper woodlands where the air was cool and food was plentiful. This seasonal round was not a random wandering, but a precise calendrical movement coordinated with the biological clocks of the flora and fauna. Central to this existence was the honey mesquite tree, or Prosopis glandulosa. Scientifically, this tree is a marvel of desert adaptation, possessing a taproot that can penetrate nearly 200 feet into the alluvium to reach the water table. Culturally, it was the staff of life. The Timbisha did not merely gather mesquite beans, they actively managed the groves. They pruned the trees to encourage growth and facilitate the harvest, keeping the canopy open and accessible. This form of proto-agriculture challenges the binary distinction often made between hunter-gatherers and farmers. The mesquite beans, which ripen in the early summer, are rich in carbohydrates and calcium. They were ground into a meal using stone pestles and mortars, distinct archaeological artifacts that can still be found near ancient campsites. The flour was made into cakes that could be stored for long periods, providing a crucial caloric buffer against the lean times. Their reliance on mesquite required a deep knowledge of the water table, as the trees are phrotophytes, indicators of groundwater, serving as a map for survival in an arid land. In the higher elevations, the single-leaf pinyon pine provided another staple, the pine nut. The harvest of pine nuts in the autumn was a major social and economic event. These nuts are high in fats and protein, essential for enduring the winter. However, the pinyon pine does not produce a consistent crop every year. It follows a mast cycle, where bumper crops occur every few years, interspersed with years of low production. The Timbisha had to predict these cycles and adjust their migration patterns accordingly, maintaining a mental database of grove productivity across vast distances. This knowledge extended to the medicinal uses of plants as well. The creosote bush, often dismissed by visitors as a monotonous scrub, was a pharmacy. Its leaves were steeped to create washes for skin ailments and teas for internal issues, utilizing the potent antimicrobial compounds the plant produces to defend itself. The archaeological record of Death Valley extends back far beyond the historic period of the Timbisha, reaching into the terminal Pleistocene, roughly 10,000 to 12,000 years ago. This was the era of the Paleo-Indians, who inhabited the region when Lake Manly was a shimmering reality. Archaeological sites from this period are fundamentally different from those of later times. They are often found along the ancient shorelines, areas that are now high and dry, stranded on the sides of the valley. These early inhabitants were likely big-game hunters, targeting the megafauna that browsed the lush vegetation of the lake margins. Projectile points found from this era, such as the Clovis and Lake Mojave types, are large and heavy, designed for use with an atlatl or spear thrower. As the climate warmed and the lake receded, the megafauna vanished, and the human population was forced to adapt or leave. This transition marks the shift to the Archaic period, where the focus turned to smaller game and, crucially, the processing of plant foods, evidenced by the appearance of milling stones in the archaeological record. One of the most intriguing aspects of the archaeological landscape is the presence of rock art, petroglyphs, and pictographs. Petroglyphs are images pecked or carved into the rock surface, removing the dark desert varnish to reveal the lighter stone beneath. Desert varnish is a thin, dark coating of manganese, iron, and clay that accumulates on stable rock surfaces over thousands of years, catalyzed by microscopic bacteria. The Timbisha and their predecessors used this varnish as a canvas. Key sites, such as those in Titus Canyon and Marble Canyon, display geometric patterns, anthropomorphic figures, and zoomorphic representations of bighorn sheep. The meaning of these symbols is a subject of intense scientific and anthropological debate. Some theories suggest they are connected to hunting magic, rituals intended to ensure success in the chase. Others propose they are territorial markers, astronomical calendars, or records of shamanistic visions induced during trance states. The Koso style of rock art, famous in the region just to the west of the park, but also present within its boundaries, is characterized by elaborate boat-shaped bighorn sheep bodies, suggesting a cultural obsession with this animal that goes beyond simple caloric need, entering the realm of spiritual reverence. Understanding the human history requires a robust understanding of the paleoclimate, for the climate dictated the terms of existence. Scientists reconstruct the ancient environments of Death Valley using a peculiar but highly effective tool, the pack rat midden. The pack rat, or wood rat, is a collector. It gathers vegetation, seeds, bone fragments, and debris from within a specific radius of its den and piles them up. Over time, the rat urinates on the pile, and the urine crystallizes into a hard, amber-like substance called amberot, which preserves the plant matter perfectly for tens of thousands of years. By finding ancient middens in caves and rock crevices and radiocarbon dating the organic material within them, paleobotanists can reconstruct the vegetation of the past with high precision. These middens reveal that during the last ice age, the slopes of Death Valley were covered in juniper and pinyon woodlands, all the way down to elevations that are now dominated by creosote scrub. The shift from woodland to desert scrub happened relatively quickly in geologic terms, forcing a massive ecological reorganization that humans had to navigate. The climate of Death Valley today is not static. It is a dynamic engine driven by seasonal extremes that dictate the rhythm of the entire ecosystem. The breakdown of the seasons here is fundamentally different from a temperate environment. Summer is the dominant season, lasting from May through September. During this time, the valley floor is thermally isolated. The superheated air masses create a high-pressure dome that deflects approaching storms. However, in late summer, a shift in wind patterns can bring moisture up from the Gulf of California and the Gulf of Mexico. This phenomenon, known as the North American monsoon, is a critical hydrological event. Unlike the frontal storms of winter, monsoon storms are convective. The intense surface heating causes rapid updrafts of moist air, forming towering cumulonimbus clouds that can unleash violent, localized downpours. A single monsoon storm can drop more rain in an hour than the valley typically receives in a year, triggering the flash floods that scour the canyons and recharge the aquifers. Winter brings a different meteorological dynamic. The subtropical high-pressure ridge weakens, allowing the jet stream to dip south and bring Pacific frontal systems into the interior. These storms are generally gentler and more widespread than the monsoon cloudbursts. Winter rain is the key to the spring wildflower blooms. The soaking nature of these rains allows water to penetrate deep into the soil profile, reaching the dormant seeds and bulbs. Snow is common in the high country during winter, capping Telescope Peak in white. This snowpack is vital, as its slow melting throughout the spring provides a steady release of water into the mountain springs, sustaining the wildlife during the drying months of early summer. The ecological zones of the park are further complicated by the presence of microclimates and specific habitat types that defy the general rules of the desert. One such environment is the sand dune system. Dunes are not lifeless piles of sand. They are complex ecosystems with their own fluid dynamics. The mesquite flat sand dunes, the most accessible in the park, are located at a convergence of winds that trap the sand in a natural eddy. The sand itself is a mixture of quartz and feldspar. Life here is specialized for a shifting substrate. The sidewinder rattlesnake, previously mentioned, is the apex predator of this microhabitat. But beneath the sand, a community of sand-swimming creatures exists. The fringe-toed lizard is adapted with comb-like scales on its toes that increase surface area, allowing it to run across the sand without sinking, and distinct nasal valves that allow it to dive headfirst into the sand to escape predators or heat without suffocating. Darkling beetles patrol the dune face, scavenging organic detritus blown in by the wind. These beetles have fused wing covers to seal in moisture and can often be seen doing headstands to catch condensation on their bodies, drinking the droplets that roll down to their mouths. Another distinct ecosystem is found in the salt marshes and flowing creeks, such as Salt Creek. This area is the habitat of the Salt Creek pupfish, a different species from the Devil's Hole variety. Salt Creek flows above ground only seasonally. In the winter and spring, the water is abundant and low in salinity. In the summer, the water recedes to isolated pools, and the salinity skyrockets as evaporation concentrates the minerals, sometimes becoming several times saltier than seawater. The pupfish possess a remarkable physiological plasticity. They can tolerate these wild swings in salinity and temperatures that would boil other fish. During the breeding season in spring, the creek is a frenzy of activity. Males turn a bright neon blue and aggressively defend territories in the shallow water, chasing away rivals and courting females. As the water dries up in summer, the population crashes, leaving only a few hardy survivors to carry the genetic line to the next wet season. This boom and bust cycle is a high-stakes evolutionary gamble played out annually. High above the salt pans, the sky islands of the Panamint Range offer a refuge for species that were widespread during the cooler Pleistocene, but are now stranded on the mountaintops. The concept of island biogeography applies here, not with water surrounding land, but with a sea of heat surrounding islands of cool forest. These high-elevation habitats support the Panamint chipmunk and the Inyo Mountains salamander. The salamander is a particularly shocking resident of a desert park. It lives only in the damp soil around permanent springs in the high desert, breathing through its skin. Its existence relies entirely on the continuous flow of groundwater. If a spring dries up, the local population goes extinct. Because these sky islands are isolated from one another by the hot valleys, genetic drift occurs, leading to slight evolutionary divergences between populations on adjacent mountain ranges. The hydrological underpinnings of these ecosystems are a subject of intense study. The water in Death Valley's springs is often fossil water, meaning it fell as rain or snow thousands of years ago. Isotope analysis allows scientists to fingerprint the water and determine its age and origin. Much of the water discharging at the large springs in the Furnace Creek area originates from a regional carbonate aquifer that extends far into Nevada. The water travels slowly through the fractured limestone bedrock, a journey that can take millennia before encountering a geological barrier, usually a fault zone, that forces it to the surface. This means that the water emerging today is a legacy of the climate from the last ice age. It also implies that current groundwater pumping in the wider region can have delayed but catastrophic effects on the park springs. If the water table drops, the springs stop flowing, and the oases die. This teleconnection between distant human activities and the park's ecosystem is a major conservation concern. The interaction between the geology and the flora is nowhere more evident than in the, quote, plant-soil relationships found in the park. Certain plants are obligate gypsophiles, meaning they can only grow on soils rich in gypsum. The unique chemical composition of the ancient lakebed sediments creates a mosaic of soil types. Some areas are high in boron, others in sulfates, others in nitrates. This soil chemistry acts as a filter, excluding most plants, but allowing highly specialized species to thrive without competition. The Death Valley monkeyflower is one such endemic, clinging to the limestone cliffs where few other plants can find a foothold. These narrow endemics are at high risk from climate change. Unlike generalist species, they cannot simply migrate to a new area because their habitat is defined by the specific geology, not just the weather. The seasonal phenology of the fauna is tightly coupled with these environmental factors. In the autumn, the tarantulas go on the move. The males leave their burrows in search of females, wandering across the desert floor. This mass movement is one of the few times these secretive arachnids are visible. Around the same time, the desert bighorn sheep enter the rut. The clash of horns echoes through the canyons as rams battle for dominance. This hierarchy is crucial for the genetic health of the herd, ensuring that only the fittest males pass on their genes. The ewes give birth in the late winter or early spring, timing the arrival of lambs with the peak vegetation growth to ensure ample milk production. The lambs must be able to walk and climb steep terrain almost immediately to avoid predation by golden eagles and mountain lions. The role of the coyote in this system is that of a mesopredator. While they hunt small game, they are also significant consumers of fruit, particularly mesquite beans and melon seeds. In doing so, they act as vectors for seed dispersal. A coyote traveling miles across the valley can deposit seeds in a new location, complete with a package of fertilizer. This endozoocracy is a primary mechanism for the movement of plant genetics across the physical barriers of the landscape. The geological dynamism of the park also includes the phenomenon of the singing sands found at the Eureka Dunes. These dunes, located in the remote northern section of the park, are the tallest in California, rising nearly 700 feet. When the sand slides down the steep face of the dune, friction between the specific silica grains creates a low-frequency hum or drone that can be as loud as a low-flying aircraft. This psychoacoustic phenomenon requires very specific grain size, roundness, and humidity levels. It is a rare occurrence worldwide, adding to the sensory uniqueness of the Death Valley wilderness. The Eureka Valley is also distinct botanically. It is home to the Eureka Valley evening primrose and the Eureka dune grass, both endangered species. The primrose features large, white flowers that open in the late afternoon to attract pollinators like the sphinx moth. The struggle to protect these species highlights the conflict between recreation and conservation. For years, off-road vehicles damaged the dunes and the plants. It took legal intervention and the elevation of the area to wilderness status to begin the recovery of these fragile populations. Further exploring the tectonic story, the chaotic landscape of the turtlebacks, large, convexly curved exposed fault surfaces, provides a window into the structural mechanics of crustal extension. These formations, resembling the shells of turtles, are metamorphic core complexes. They show where the overlying brittle rock has slid off the deeper, ductile rock that was being stretched like taffy deep underground. The Copper Canyon turtleback is a classic example, offering structural geologists a tangible diagram of the Earth's plasticity. The mineral wealth that drove the historic mining era was not distributed randomly, but was concentrated by hydrothermal activity. The borax deposits were formed in the drying playa lakes, but the gold and silver were deposited by hot fluids circulating through fractures in the rock, often associated with the volcanic periods. The Keen Wonder Mine, one of the most successful gold mines in the valley's history, tapped into a quartz vein system created by this hydrothermal injection. The infrastructure of the mine, the aerial tramway that carried ore down the precipitous mountain face, remains as a skeleton of industrial ambition. It stands in stark contrast to the Timbisha's sustainable integration with the land, representing an extractive mindset that viewed the geology as a vault to be broken rather than a home to be maintained. The biological soil crusts mentioned earlier are also part of a larger carbon cycle in the desert. While deserts are not typically thought of as carbon sinks like forests, the vast surface area of alkaline soils in Death Valley may play a role in absorbing atmospheric carbon dioxide through the formation of carbonate minerals. This inorganic carbon sequestration is a slow process, but on a geological timescale and a continental scale, it is a significant factor in the global carbon budget. As one traverses the park from south to north, the character of the valleys changes. The southern valleys are broader and filled with salt. The northern valleys, like the Saline Valley, are more isolated and rugged. Saline Valley is famous for its warm springs, a geothermal feature where groundwater is heated by shallow magma bodies or deep circulation before rising to the surface. These springs create a unique microhabitat of distinct algae and microbial mats that thrive in the hot, mineral-rich water. The isolation of Saline Valley has preserved a sense of extreme remoteness, where the silence is absolute, broken only by the wind or the call of a burrow. The invasive burrows mentioned previously are a complex management issue. Biologically, they are incredibly successful. They dig specifically for water, creating wells in dry washes that can technically benefit other wildlife. However, their aggressive territoriality and voracious grazing habits generally degrade the habitat for native species. The burrow trails etched into the hillsides lead to soil compaction and erosion, altering the runoff patterns during storms. The debate over their management involves balancing the protection of native biodiversity with the cultural affection some hold for these symbols of the mining West. The vast emptiness of the park also facilitates the study of desert varnish dating. By analyzing the ratio of unstable chemical elements in the varnish, researchers attempt to date the exposure of the rock surfaces. This technique, though controversial and difficult to calibrate, offers a potential way to date petroglyphs and geological events directly on the rock face, bypassing the need for organic carbon. Death Valley's atmosphere creates optical phenomena beyond mirages. The green flash at sunset is occasionally visible due to the clear horizon and strong refraction. The zodiacal light, a faint triangular glow seen before sunrise or after sunset, is caused by sunlight scattering off interplanetary dust in the solar system. In most places, light pollution obscures this, but the pristine dark skies of the park make it a regular feature for the observant visitor, connecting the dust of the desert floor with the dust of the solar system. The concept of extreme microbiology is being pioneered in the park's salt pans. Astrobiologists study the halophilic bacteria and archaea living inside the salt crystals as proxies for life that might exist on Mars or the icy moons of Jupiter. These organisms can go into a state of suspended animation for years, encased in salt, only to reanimate when dissolved in water. They produce protective pigments, often pink or red, which contribute to the coloration of the salt and brine pools. This research reframes Death Valley not just as a national park, but as a planetary analog, a testing ground for the search for life beyond Earth. One cannot ignore the soundscape ecology. The shape of the canyons affects how sound travels. In the Narrows, sound is funneled and amplified. On the open bajadas, it dissipates rapidly. Animals utilize these acoustic properties. The calls of the canyon wren, a cascading series of clear notes, are perfectly adapted to reverberate off the canyon walls, carrying the bird's territorial claim further than it would in an open field. The large ears of the kit fox and the jackrabbit are directional receivers, swiveling to pinpoint the faint rustle of a kangaroo rat or the sweep of an owl's wing. The seasonal transition from spring to summer induces a process called hardening off in the perennial plants. The leaves of the brittlebush, for example, which are green and broad in the winter, may be shed and replaced by smaller, white pubescent leaves that reflect more sunlight. Some plants, like the acotillo, shed their leaves entirely and photosynthesize through their green stems, entering a state of semi-dormancy to wait out the thermal siege. The interaction between the wind and the vegetation creates nebkhas or coppice dunes. These are small mounds of sand that accumulate around the base of a shrub, anchored by its branches. The shrub acts as a windbreak, trapping the sand. Over time, the mound grows, lifting the plant higher. This provides the plant's roots with a deeper, sandier soil medium that holds water better than the surrounding hardpan, creating a self-reinforcing microhabitat that facilitates survival. The park's boundaries encompass the transition zone between the Mojave and the Great Basin deserts. This ecotone is biologically rich because it contains elements of both. The Mojave is characterized by the Joshua tree and creosote, adapted to winter rain and hot summers. The Great Basin is a cold desert, characterized by sagebrush and saltbush, adapted to snow and freezing winters. In the northern reaches of the park, one can see the mixing of these two biomes, a blending of species that creates unique community assemblages found nowhere else. Human endurance in the park during the summer is a physiological challenge. The human body cools itself primarily through the evaporation of sweat. In the low humidity of Death Valley, sweat evaporates instantly, often before it is felt. This leads to insensible perspiration, where a person can lose gallons of water without realizing they are sweating. If this water is not replaced, along with electrolytes, the body's cooling mechanism fails, leading to heat stroke. The dry air also creates a massive gradient for moisture loss from the lungs, meaning just breathing is a dehydrating act. This biological reality underscores the extremity of the environment that the Timbisha and the wildlife have mastered. The geological narrative continues with the Amargosa chaos, a jumbled formation of rock in the southern part of the park. It consists of blocks of rock of widely different ages, faulted and tilted in a disordered manner. This chaos is interpreted as evidence of massive crustal extension, where the upper crust shattered as it rode atop a flowing lower layer. It is a visual representation of the violent forces that are literally pulling the park apart. Within the canyons, the phenomenon of pothole formation is evident. Swirling water during flash floods carries gravel that gets trapped in depressions in the bedrock. The vortex motion grinds the gravel into the rock, drilling perfectly circular, smooth-sided holes. Over time, these potholes can merge to form deep, convoluted slots. These features are ephemeral in geologic time, but provide critical, shaded pools for amphibians and insects long after the floods have passed. The park also preserves the history of early scientific exploration. The Grinnell expedition in the early 20th century was instrumental in documenting the biodiversity of the region. Joseph Grinnell and his team conducted transects across the valley, collecting specimens and taking detailed field notes. Their work established the baseline data that modern scientists use to measure changes in animal populations and distributions in response to climate change. This historical data is invaluable, allowing for a comparative analysis that spans a century of environmental change. The symbiotic relationships extend to the soil itself. Mycorrhizal fungi attach to the roots of many desert plants, extending the root system's reach by orders of magnitude. These fungi are microscopic threads that forage for water and nutrients in the soil micropores that plant roots are too thick to enter. In exchange, the plant provides the fungi with sugars from photosynthesis. This underground network is the invisible lifeline of the desert flora, connecting individuals and facilitating the transfer of resources in a nutrient-poor environment. Even the death of an organism contributes to the life of the desert. A fallen cactus or a dead pinyon pine becomes a nurse log. It provides shade, traps moisture, and protects seedlings from herbivores. As it decomposes, it releases nutrients back into the soil, creating a fertile island where the next generation of plants can establish. In the slow-motion world of the desert, this process of decay and renewal can take decades. The rain shadow effect mentioned earlier has a secondary consequence: high evaporation rates. The potential evaporation in Death Valley is over 150 inches per year. Since rainfall is less than 2 inches, the water deficit is immense. This deficit drives the movement of groundwater and the crystallization of salts. It creates a landscape where water is the most precious currency, traded, stored, and stolen by every living thing. As the sun sets over the Panamint Range, the thermal dynamics shift again. The ground radiates its heat back into space, and the air cools rapidly. This diurnal temperature fluctuation can be as much as 40 or 50 degrees. The cooling air flows down the canyons as katabatic winds, settling in the valley floor, For the camper or the nocturnal animal, this nightly reset is a reprieve from the tyranny of the sun. It is in this twilight time that the desert feels most alive, the air filled with the sense of sage and damp earth, a sensory reminder of the complex, fragile, and enduring web of life that defines Death Valley National Park. To comprehend the geological architecture of Death Valley is to read a biography of the North American continent written in stone, a narrative that begins long before the biological adaptations of the kangaroo rat or the cultural innovations of the Timbisha Shoshone. The sensory experience of the cool, katabatic winds settling into the valley floor at twilight serves as a whisper of the immense atmospheric and gravitational forces at play. But the rocks themselves shout a story of violence, submersion, and fire that spans nearly 2 billion years. It is in the geological history that the true identity of the park is forged, creating the very stage upon which the biological and cultural dramas are enacted. The transition from observing the living skin of the desert to examining its skeletal structure requires a shift in temporal perspective, moving from the daily struggle for water to the eon-long struggle of tectonic plates. The basement of Death Valley, the foundation upon which all else rests, is composed of crystalline metamorphic rocks that date back to the Proterozoic eon, approximately 1.7 billion years ago. These rocks, primarily gneiss and schist, are visible today in the steep faces of the Black Mountains and the Panamint Range. They represent the roots of an ancient mountain chain that has long since eroded away. These primordial rocks were subjected to immense heat and pressure deep within the Earth's crust, causing the minerals to realign and band together, a process known as foliation. For hundreds of millions of years, this landscape was a scene of metamorphic intensity, devoid of macroscopic life, a stark contrast to the biologically diverse, albeit harsh, environment we see today. These basement rocks were eventually uplifted and eroded flat, forming a geological unconformity, a gap in the time record, upon which the seas of the Paleozoic era would eventually intrude. Roughly 500 million years ago, the geography of this region was unrecognizable. Death Valley lay near the equator, submerged under a warm, shallow sea that formed the passive margin of the North American continent, much like the continental shelf of the Gulf of Mexico today. In these tropical waters, layers of carbonate sediment accumulated. The hard shells of trilobites, brachiopods, and microscopic marine organisms rained down upon the seafloor, mixing with lime mud. Over millions of years, the immense weight of these accumulating sediments compressed the lower layers into limestone and dolomite. The Noonday Dolomite, a prominent rock formation in the park, tells the story of this era. It is a thick, gray-to-cream-colored rock that often forms sheer cliffs because it is resistant to erosion. Within these ancient marine rocks, paleontologists find stromatolites, fossilized mats of algae that are among the earliest evidence of life on Earth. These layered structures provide a direct link to the oxygenation of the planet's atmosphere, a chemical revolution that paved the way for all subsequent air-breathing life. As the Paleozoic gave way to the Mesozoic era, roughly 250 million years ago, the tectonic regime shifted dramatically. The passive continental margin became an active subduction zone. The Pacific tectonic plate began to slide beneath the North American plate, a process that generated intense friction and heat. This collision ignited a chain of volcanoes along the coast, the roots of which would eventually become the Sierra Nevada batholith to the west. In the Death Valley region, this compressional force did not manifest as volcanism initially, but as deformation. The flat-lying layers of limestone and sandstone were squeezed, folded, and fractured. This period, known as the severe orogeny, was characterized by thin-skinned thrust faulting. Older rocks were shoved up and over younger rocks, stacking the crust like a deck of cards. The resulting chaotic arrangement of rock layers is vividly displayed in areas like Titus Canyon, where the rock strata are bent into a large, recumbent fold, turning the geological timeline upside down. The true birth of Death Valley as a topographical feature, however, belongs to the Cenozoic era, specifically the last 25 million years. The compressional forces that built the mountains relaxed, and the crust began to stretch and thin. This region entered the basin and range disturbance. As the crust pulled apart, it broke into massive blocks along north-south trending faults. The blocks that sank formed the basins: Death Valley, Panamint Valley, Saline Valley, and the blocks that tilted upward formed the ranges. This process is ongoing. The valley is not a static bowl. It is a dynamic graben that is actively dropping. The steep western face of the Black Mountains is a fault scarp, a direct physical evidence of this tectonic slippage. The mountains here are relatively young in their current elevation, rising abruptly from the valley floor without the foothills that characterize older, more eroded mountain ranges. Volcanism returned to the region during this period of extension. As the crust thinned, magma from the mantle was able to rise to the surface. The artist's drive formation, with its kaleidoscope of colors, is a sequence of volcanic ash deposits, lava flows, and sedimentary debris from this explosive period. The chemistry of these volcanic rocks varies, ranging from rhyolite, which is rich in silica and explosive, to basalt, which is lower in silica and flows more fluidly. The interaction of these hot rocks with groundwater created hydrothermal systems that deposited minerals like gold, silver, and borax in the fractures and basins. The weathering of these volcanic rocks releases the specific mix of minerals that paints the Badlands in hues of pink, green, and purple, a chemical oxidation process similar to the rusting of iron. During the Pleistocene epoch, or the Ice Ages, beginning about 2 million years ago, the climate of Death Valley was vastly different. While glaciers did not cover the valley floor, the cooler, wetter climate supported a system of interconnected lakes. Runoff from the melting glaciers in the Sierra Nevada filled the Owens Valley to the west, spilling over into the China Lake Basin, then into the Searles Lake Basin, then into the Panamint Valley, and finally cascading into Death Valley to form Lake Manly. At its height, Lake Manly was 600 feet deep and stretched 90 miles long. The evidence of this ancient lake is etched into the landscape. Shoreline Butte, located in the southern part of the park, displays a series of horizontal terraces carved into the rock. These are wave-cut benches, ancient beaches where the surf of Lake Manly once battered the island. As the climate fluctuated between glacial and interglacial periods, the lake level rose and fell, leaving a staircase of shorelines that records the hydrological history of the Quaternary period. The eventual drying of Lake Manly created the vast salt pan that defines the valley floor today. As the water evaporated, it could no longer hold its dissolved minerals in solution. The precipitation of these minerals followed a specific chemical sequence. First, the less soluble carbonates, like calcite, precipitated out near the shorelines. Next came the sulfates, such as gypsum. Finally, in the lowest and driest parts of the basin, the highly soluble chlorides, table salt, crystallized. This chemical zoning is visible to the trained eye. The central salt pan is largely sodium chloride, creating the stark white expanse. The margins are often brownish and crusty, composed of gypsum and silt. The borate minerals, which made the region famous, are found in specific zones where volcanic waters mix with the lake brine, creating concentrations of ulexite and colemanite. The geological distinctiveness of Mosaic Canyon offers a specific lesson in the power of metamorphism and flash flood erosion. The smooth, polished walls of this canyon are carved into the noonday dolomite. However, at this location, the dolomite was subjected to such heat and pressure from local faulting that it metamorphosed into marble. Marble is softer than the original dolomite and more susceptible to abrasion. The periodic flash floods that roar down Mosaic Canyon carry a load of angular grit and gravel. This slurry acts like sandpaper, scouring the marble walls into fluid, undulating shapes that resemble abstract sculpture. The mosaic in the name refers to the breccia found in the canyon, a rock composed of broken fragments of other rocks cemented together. This breccia indicates a past environment of violent, high-energy debris flows that shattered the bedrock and fused the pieces into a new matrix. Another specific feature that highlights the structural geology is the concept of the turtleback. These are large, dome-shaped formations found along the Black Mountain's front, such as the Copper Canyon turtleback and the Mormon Point turtleback. These structures expose the deep, metamorphic core of the mountains. They are formed by detachment faulting, where the upper, brittle layer of the crust slides off the lower, more ductile layer, like a tablecloth sliding off a table. The exposed surface of the table is the smooth, curved back of the turtle. These formations are rare and provide geologists with a window into the mechanics of extreme crustal extension that is usually hidden miles beneath the surface. The interaction between the wind and the landscape formation is most evident in the ventifacts found on the stony alluvial fans. Ventifacts are rocks that have been faceted and polished by wind-blown sand. In the Venturici effect of the valley, where winds are funneled and accelerated, the sand acts as a relentless abrasive. Over centuries, a seemingly random rock can be carved into a pyramid shape with sharp keels, known as a drycanter, pointing into the prevailing wind direction. This aeolian process is slow but persistent, shaping the microtopography of the desert pavement. The desert pavement itself is a geological curiosity, a surface of interlocking rocks that fits together like a jigsaw puzzle. Beneath this pavement lies a layer of fine silt. The current theory is that the dust settles between the rocks, and when it rains, the clay in the dust expands, lifting the rocks slightly. Over thousands of years, the rocks stay on top, while the dust accumulates underneath, creating a stable armor that protects the soil from erosion. The hydrogeology of the Funeral Mountains, located on the eastern border of the park, presents a contrast to the salt pan. These mountains are composed largely of limestone, which is soluble in slightly acidic rainwater. This leads to the formation of karst topography, characterized by caves and underground drainage systems. While Death Valley is not famous for cavern exploration, the Devil's Hole system mentioned previously is a water-filled collapse of a karst cavern. The deep aquifers within these limestone mountains act as a massive underground reservoir, storing water that fell centuries ago and slowly releasing it at springs, like Travertine Springs near Furnace Creek. The travertine rock found here is a form of limestone deposited by geothermal springs. As the hot, calcium-rich water reaches the surface and cools, it releases carbon dioxide, causing the calcium carbonate to precipitate instantly, building up mounds and terraces of porous stone. The mineralogy of the borax deposits is chemically fascinating. Boron is a rare element in the Earth's crust. Its concentration in Death Valley is due to the closed basin hydrology. The borax minerals, such as ulexite, are colloquially known as cotton ball borax because of their fibrous, white appearance. Ulexite has a unique optical property. The fibers act as natural fiber optic cables. If a piece of ulexite is polished flat on both ends and placed over a line of text, the image of the text is projected to the top surface of the rock. This property earned it the nickname TV rock. The mining of these minerals involved scraping the surface crusts in the early days, but later shifted to underground mining of harder borate ores like colemanite and kernite in the mountains. The transformation of these raw minerals into the cleaning products used globally is a testament to the industrial application of this unique geology. The formation of Ubahibi Crater in the northern part of the park is a relatively recent geological event, occurring perhaps as recently as 2,000 years ago. It represents a hydromagmatic eruption. As magma rose toward the surface, it encountered the groundwater table. The heat flashed the water into steam, causing a massive expansion that blew the rock above it into the sky. The resulting crater is a maar, distinct from a caldera which is formed by collapse. The layers of rock exposed in the walls of Ubahibe are not lava flows, but sedimentary layers of the valley fill that were sliced open. The debris field surrounding the crater, known as the tuff ring, is composed of the shattered rock and ash that rained down after the explosion. This violent episode serves as a reminder that the geological tranquility of the present is deceptive. The tectonic narrative of Death Valley is further complicated by the strike-slip motion. The valley is not just pulling apart. The blocks are also sliding past each other. The Furnace Creek Fault Zone creates a right lateral movement. This means if you stood on one side of the fault and looked across, the landscape on the other side would appear to be moving to your right. This horizontal motion, combined with the vertical drop, creates a pull-apart basin, technically known as a rhombochasm. This specific tectonic geometry helps explain the extreme depth of the sedimentary basin. Geophysical surveys suggest that the bedrock floor of the valley is actually thousands of feet deeper than the current surface, filled in with miles of gravel and salt. We are walking on top of a massive pile of debris that fills a deep tectonic tear in the crust. The racetrack playa, beyond the mystery of the moving stones, is a geological study in sedimentation. The playa is incredibly flat, with a variation in elevation of only a few inches over several miles. This flatness is achieved by the settling of fine clay particles in the ephemeral lake that forms after rains. When the water evaporates, the clay shrinks and cracks, forming hexagonal mud cracks. The surrounding geology of the racetrack is dominated by the grandstand, an outcrop of quartz monzonite. This dark, island-like rock formation contrasts sharply with the white playa. It is an intrusive igneous rock formed from magma that cooled slowly underground and was later exposed by erosion. The juxtaposition of the intrusive grandstand and the sedimentary playa highlights the different timescales of rock formation and surface erosion. The canyons of the Panamint Range, such as Wild Rose Canyon, showcase the result of millions of years of incision. These canyons were not carved by permanent rivers, but by episodic flash floods. The shape of the canyons, V-shaped and steep-sided, indicates that the land is rising faster than the water can erode it, or that the erosion is relatively young. In these canyons, one can see the charcoal kilns. These beehive-shaped stone structures are a direct link between the geology and human industry. They were built in the 1870s to burn pinyon pine into charcoal. The charcoal was then transported to the smelters in the valley to process silver-lead ore. The location of the kilns was dictated by the biological zone of the pinyon forest, but their purpose was dictated by the mineralogical zone of the silver deposits. This supply chain illustrates how the vertical zonation of the park shaped human economic activity. The preservation of fossils in the park is largely due to the arid climate. In addition to the tracks of ancient mammals, the park contains fossilized footprints of birds and carnivores. The Copper Canyon Trackway is one of the most significant paleontological sites in the American West. It preserves a snapshot of a Pliocene lakeshore ecosystem. The tracks were made in soft mud, which was then rapidly buried by gentle sedimentation, preserving the delicate impressions before they could erode. These trace fossils allow scientists to reconstruct the behavior of extinct animals, how they moved, where they watered, and how they interacted, adding a dynamic behavioral layer to the static skeletal record. The varying colors of the mountains are not merely aesthetic, but chemical. The reds and pinks are hematite, iron oxide. The yellows are limonite. The greens often indicate the presence of chlorite or reduced iron. The distinctive black stripes seen in some formations are often basalt dikes, sheets of lava that injected into cracks in the existing rock. The complexity of the rock record in Death Valley attracts geology students from around the world because the lack of vegetation leaves the structure of the earth completely exposed. It is a textbook with the pages torn open. Folding, faulting, intrusion, and erosion are visible at a macro scale, allowing for the visualization of three-dimensional geological structures that are usually hidden by soil and forests in other parts of the world. The concept of the alluvial fan reaches its exemplar status here. As water rushes out of a confined canyon, it loses velocity and spreads out. As it slows, it loses the energy to carry its load of rocks. It drops the heaviest boulders first, near the canyon mouth, the apex of the fan, and carries the finer gravel and sand further out, the toe of the fan. Over time, this builds a cone-shaped deposit. In Death Valley, the fans are so large that they coalesce into a bajada. The segmentation of these fans can reveal climatic history. Active channels cut into older, darker, desert-varnished fan surfaces, indicating pulses of tectonic uplift or changes in rainfall intensity. The older parts of the fan, dark with varnish, may have been stable for tens of thousands of years, while the lighter, active channels are reshaped with every major storm. The deep silence of the backcountry is an acoustic property derived from this landscape. The rough, porous surfaces of the alluvial fans and the chaotic badlands scatter sound waves, preventing echoes and absorbing noise. In contrast, the hard, flat surface of the salt pan reflects sound. This variability in the acoustic landscape affects how animals communicate. The coyote's howl carries differently across the salt flats than it does in the winding narrows of Titus Canyon. This acoustic ecology is a subtle but integral part of the park's natural character. The interaction of the Amargosa River with the southern geology creates a wandering oasis. The river flows south from Nevada, turns north into Death Valley, and mostly flows underground. However, at the Amargosa Narrows, a block of hard, impermeable bedrock forces the groundwater to the surface. This creates a permanent flow of water in the desert, sustaining lush vegetation and the endangered Amargosa vole. The existence of this rare mammal depends entirely on this geological dam that forces the river to daylight. It is a prime example of how geological structure dictates biological destiny. In the global context of plate tectonics, Death Valley is a key piece of the puzzle in understanding diffuse plate boundaries. Unlike the sharp line of the San Andreas Fault, where two plates slide past each other along a single fracture, the Basin and Range Province represents a broad zone of deformation. The continent is stretching over a wide area. Studying the rate of extension in Death Valley helps geophysicists model how continents break apart and how new oceans are born. If the process continues for millions of years, the valley could eventually dip below sea level enough to be flooded by the ocean, creating a new narrow sea similar to the Red Sea. The educational value of the park is immense. It serves as an open-air laboratory for researchers studying everything from extremophile bacteria to planetary geomorphology. The resemblance of the Mars surface to the rocky plains of Death Valley is not coincidental. Both are shaped by basalt, wind, and ancient water. NASA rovers are often tested here to calibrate their instruments on the harsh, rock-strewn terrain. The park allows us to ask fundamental questions about the limits of life and the evolution of planets. As we consider the totality of Death Valley National Park, we are left with a paradox. Its name suggests an end, a void, a cessation of vitality. Yet the scientific reality is one of vibrant, tenacious, and complex continuity. The rocks record a history of seas and volcanoes that spans eons. The plants and animals demonstrate the incredible ingenuity of evolution in the face of scarcity. The human history reveals a deep capacity for adaptation and endurance. It is a landscape that strips away the superfluous, leaving only the essential. To stand in the center of the salt pan, surrounded by the silent, towering mountains, is to stand in the presence of deep time. It is a place that humbles the observer, reminding us that we are fleeting residents on a restless planet. The park preserves not just a collection of rocks and rare species, but the raw, unpolished machinery of the earth itself. It challenges us to find beauty in the barren, value in the void, and life in the heat. In the end, Death Valley is not a land of death, but a testament to the stubborn, unyielding persistence of existence. It stands as one of the supreme natural cathedrals of North America, a place where the earth is laid bare, inviting us to read the story of our world in its most elemental form.